Thanks for tuning into the Velocity Church Cleveland podcast, where our mission is to ignite the faith that fuels your life to impact the world. Keep listening now to our current series.
As some of you may remember, last week we started a sermon series that we called Confident. And the reason I wanted to do that series is because I wanted all of us to see something that we've never seen before. I wanted us to see what it looks like to be totally confident that God really was with you even when everything in life goes wrong. Because it's easy to cheer on Jesus and, I believe and I love the Lord when things are amazing. But when life turns upside down, when you lose your job, when inflation starts to rise so fast that you don't know how you're going to make ends meet, when your son or your daughter goes off the grid spiritually, when you feel like, I don't know how to get out of this, those are the times when it's really hard to be confident that God really is with you, cheering for you. And if anyone in human history understood how difficult it was to be confident in God in spite of extreme circumstances, it was a guy in the Old Testament that a lot of people think they know about, a guy named Joseph. But what makes Joseph's story so unique, and this is the part that we in America miss all the time, what makes Joseph's story so unique is that he lived in a time in history when he didn't really know anything about the God he said he believed in. Because at this time in history, there was no such thing as a Bible. It didn't exist. There was no such thing as a church. There weren't people who came on Sundays. There were no Christians. In fact, this story took place so long ago that the only thing Joseph knew about the God he said he believed in were some random stories that had been handed down to him from his great-grandpa. But even though Joseph didn't know much about the God he served, he responded to some of the most horrible events life has to offer as if he really believed that the God of his forefathers was going to see him through any situation. And we learned last week that Joseph's problems, like these major issues in life, didn't start when he was in his 40s or 50s or 60s. They started when he was a teenager. Because they taught us that when Joseph was just a young man, there was all of this insecurity and anxiety that kind of brimmed up in the middle of his own family. Look at what the Bible says about that in Genesis 37. It says, now Israel, that was Joseph's dad, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age. And he made a richly ornamented robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. And some of you know, I've been there. That's my family. Because when she comes in the room at Christmas, it gets so tense that some people just get up and leave. We can't even talk on the phone. We don't even text because they have nothing nice to say. And then this family situation gets worse. Because one day Jacob tells Joseph to go to a place called Shechem to check on his brothers because they were kind of shepherding this big flock. He goes, you go check on your brothers. You bring back a report about how they're doing. And I want you to see what happens in verse 18. It says, they saw him in the distance. And before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. Here comes that dreamer, they said to each other, come, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. And verse 23 says, so when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him. You think about it's bad in your family? They stripped him of the robe, the richly ornamented robe he was wearing, and they took their own brother and threw him in a cistern. And look, I don't care how messed up your family was growing up. It was nothing like this. because you've probably never had a day when your brother, your sister, your mom or dad basically ripped all of your clothes off, because that's really what it was. He had a robe and a tunic. They ripped his clothes off, beat him up, and threw him basically naked in a cistern. And after they did that, they said, you know what we should do? We should probably get something to eat. We should probably have lunch. So as they sit down, it's the craziest story. As they sit down to kind of have their lunch, they start discussing among themselves, hey, what are we going to do with the brother we just beat up? And verse 25 says, as they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. And Judah said to his brothers, you know what? Wait, what do we gain? What do we gain if we kill our brother and just cover up his blood? I have an idea. Let's sell him. Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood, and his brothers agree. Now, here's the weird thing. They're sitting there having this conversation like, look, there's no return on investment here. We're not going to make any money if we just kill him. What's the cash value? Because you have to see past this as an American, because a lot of us have heard the story before. We have to see past this. This wasn't just a jealousy thing. This was also a money-driven thing. So when the text later, when Paul writes to Timothy that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, don't blow past that verse, because that verse started all the way back in Genesis. Because the drive for money, the drive for resources, right? We talked about this for weeks, right? Where our focus is, because instead of focusing here, it's easy to still look over here. We're going to shift in focus. Remember we talked about that? That's where this starts, all the way back in Genesis 37. So what happened was they say, you know, what's the return on investment here? Verse 29 says this. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of a cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. And what's fascinating is, many years later, there was another very well-known person that a lot of people admired, who was sold not for 20 shekels of silver. He was sold for 20 pieces of silver to someone that he spent a lot of time with. And if I think real hard, that rabbi's name was Jesus. And why was he sold? Well, there was a return on investment here. But at this point in the story, you seriously have to ask yourself one very important question. And that question is this. If God really cared about Joseph, why would he allow that to happen? Why would he allow all the problems and the tension in this family? Because after all, why do bad things happen to good people? But what I find literally mind-blowing is that even though Joseph lost everything he had in a moment, because you have to remember, there's no police, there's no Secret Service, there's no phone call, nobody's coming to look for Joseph. The second he was sold for 20 pieces of silver, it was over. Everything he knew at that point in his life changed. He lost his family, his relationship with his parents, his security, his normal way of life. But even though Joseph lost everything he had, it didn't wreck his faith. It only made his faith in the God he didn't really even know stronger, which makes no sense at all. But this morning, you're going to hear a real life story of two people who experienced the very same thing. They went through a series of circumstances that would make most people crumble. But they saw God provide for them in ways that you could never possibly imagine. Would you do me a favor and welcome my really good friends, Tim and Kelly Hadazakis. Zakis. Go ahead. Okay, so first off, I know you two a little bit. Everybody here probably doesn't know you very well. So why don't you just both take about a minute or two, and why don't you tell everybody a little bit about you, just tell us about your family, your background, where you grew up, kids, family, all that stuff.
My name's Kelly, and I am from Northwest Ohio. I grew up there, I'm an only child, and I went to Toledo Christian High School where I met Tim. We're high school sweethearts. We've been married now for 29 years. This fall will be our 30th wedding anniversary. Very excited. And we have 5 children. We have a daughter in Canton who's married, and so we're grandparents. We have 2 grandchildren. We have a son in the Marines. He's active duty in North Carolina. We have our daughter who's here. She goes to Kent, and she's graduating this year. We have our son Tyler who lives with us at home, and we have our son John who's graduating from high school.
So this year on December 10th, 2021, you guys went through an experience that most people could never even imagine going through. What you guys did is you guys went to Gilbertsville, Kentucky to celebrate a really special occasion. Why don't you take a minute and tell everybody why you went to Gilbertsville and what happened?
So this past December was my parents' 50th wedding anniversary. And my brother and I wanted to help them and celebrate that. So we decided to rent them a cabin and give them a place to stay without us. It's kind of a weekend away. And my parents didn't like that idea. They want to be around their family. And we didn't really care. My brother and I, we didn't really care. We just said go and have fun and do your thing. So that's why we were there.
There's actually a picture of the cabin that they went to, right here. So the whole family's kind of there. You guys are celebrating. And if I remember the story right, when you guys got there, you went to the store, you guys got some food, and then later in the day, your parents actually came. Is that right? Tell us about that.
So all along, Tim says we didn't care, but he was actually surprising them. So we went and got some snacks, and Tim's parents arrived. They were so excited we were there. We videotaped them. They didn't know, and we were so happy to celebrate. We had a meal together, and we started to play some games.
And you didn't just that, you guys also decorated. Well, look at this. They also decorated the house. They got there like, hey, we're going to make this a big deal. But that night, the first night that you guys got there, something happened that literally turned your entire world upside down. Why don't you tell everybody what happened?
Well, a thunderstorm started, and we knew there was going to be bad weather, so we weren't going to have a fire outside. And as the night went on, my sister-in-law had a headache, and she decided to go to bed and down in the basement. And eventually, after the games were done, I went to sleep upstairs. And that's where Tim started storm watching.
So the weather was getting worse and worse and worse. There were 7 of us that were still awake. Like Kelly said, she was upstairs. My sister-in-law went down into the basement. So there were 7 of us that were watching the storm. There was, in that one photo, there was a wraparound porch on this whole cabin. So we were out front in the porch watching. My brother and I were trying to look at the storm, trying to ascertain how big or how bad it was. It was a very wooded area, so we couldn't really see much, see through the woods. And then we were just walking back and forth between the front of the home and the rear of the home. There was a screened-in porch at the rear of the home, and we were walking back and forth between trying to figure out what was going on with the storm. The whole time, all of our phones were blowing up, severe weather alerts and tornado warnings and this and that. And being from Ohio and hearing a tornado warning is not a big deal because we don't really get tornadoes even if we have warnings. So it wasn't a fear in any of us. I mean, we're all from Northeast Ohio. My parents don't live there anymore, but that's neither here nor there. We're from here, so we understand the weather. And none of us really cared much about it. So in the midst of all of that happening, the rain had stopped and the wind had stopped. It was dead calm and no rain. And I was looking out from the screened-in porch, and all the lights in the cabin went dark, and simultaneously all the lights around the area that we were at, we could see through the lake, over the lake, and all the properties. Everything went dark. So at that point, I told my brother, I said, get everybody into the basement so we can ride this thing out. We don't know what's going to happen. We still didn't really know what was coming. And there was a corner of the basement that was concrete on 2 walls. So we had everyone wanting to go down to that area. I told my brother that I was going upstairs to get Kelly, and we would be down.
And so you get everybody in that direction, but you weren't there. Tell us what happened. Tell them where you were.
So I was in the upstairs bedroom asleep, and Tim comes in and says, baby, we got to go. This is very serious. I was dead asleep. And so he's trying to hurry me down the stairs, and the stairs go down this way, and there's a long walkway to reach to the basement. He says, come on. And so we get to the stairs, and my father-in-law is standing there waiting for us. He said, I wouldn't leave you guys. I wanted to check. So Tim says to his dad, get in the basement now. We travel partway down the stairs, and a massive tornado hits us, and we are knocked to the ground. Wind, glass, 2x4s, the stairs flip up. Then Tim and I are pinned and trapped under all the rubble of the home. The home is completely demolished, and we are locked in the rubble.
So the house comes down. Walk us through what happened the next several minutes. Tell us about how'd you get out, what happened.
So we were completely pinned, and everything, our heads were pinned under wood. You couldn't really raise your head, but we were pinned with our heads facing each other. So I could just barely lift my chin and could see Tim, and he could see me. It was incredible that we were alive. And Tim's brother started roll calling to his wife, we had our son with us, they had their sons with them, and to mom and dad to make sure everyone was okay. Tim and Kelly, where are you? Tim and Kelly. We frantically calling out, we're here, and we can hear my brother-in-law pulling off drywall sheets and wood and ductwork and trying to get to us. And then he shines his light towards us, and then we can see him. And we are crying out, help us. I was a little bit frantic. He's trying to pry with 2x4s to get us free. And it's causing all of the debris to collapse further on me and pin me further. I'm farthest back. And so Tim takes it upon himself. It's almost miraculous. It's almost like we don't understand. But Tim crawls over to me and pushes up with all that he can, arches his back like a cat would, and is able to raise the stairs just enough that I army crawl out from under him, under all the debris. I didn't know which direction to go, but I popped out. And Tim army crawled right behind me. And then we're standing in the open air in the middle of a thunderstorm, but we're free, we're safe.
Well, we're not safe. We were not safe.
But that wasn't true with your dad, correct?
Correct. So when the tornado hit the house, and Kelly and I were coming down the stairs, people ask me all the time, does it sound like a train or does it sound like a locomotive? The answer is yes. It sounds like a locomotive, and it's scary. But when it hit the house, the pressure in the house changes, ears pop, and then I just hear things exploding. When we were coming down the stairs, like Kelly said, my dad was still behind us. And when we got to that landing, right as the storm was hitting, or right as the tornado was hitting, my dad scurried around us to be with my mom. They were standing in an archway, like underneath the stairs. And that's where the washer and dryer and water heater were. And he figured that archway was the safest place for him to be because they couldn't get to that room that we were all trying to get to. So he grabbed my mom's hand. Sorry.
And he said, I've loved you my whole life. And the tornado hit, and he was pinned and trapped. He was trapped under the hot water tank, and then the wall that was pinning the washer or dryer, one of them, it was pinning his foot. And he was pinned for about an hour while we all worked frantically to try to release him. we could call out across we're on a basement that's now, there's no home. It's just flat, level basement flooring. And we called out and somebody answered. And they came, and it was a retired firefighter. And this retired firefighter's name is Randy. And he worked along with another gentleman and my husband and his brother to try to free my father-in-law. And we were able to free him. It was the way it happened is miraculous.
Now, to put this into perspective, you saw what the house looked like before when they were all standing in front. This is what the house looked like when it came down. Throw that next slide up. So it wasn't just, it was everything around them was gone. And you have to remember, the story that they're telling you didn't happen in daylight. It happened at night. You could see nothing. No light, no overheads, nothing. But the weird part, the part that just kind of like, what in the world? The part of your story that really caught my attention the most was, this is a situation that most people could never dream of being in. And in the midst of a really bad situation, you guys both feel like God provided some stuff for you that even to me didn't make sense. Why don't you guys take a few minutes and tell them about that?
My sister-in-law and my son and her two boys were in a room that was completely sealed and pinned, and they climbed up out of the basement using a bunk bed. And when they got to the top, everybody was in their pajamas. It's nighttime. They're barefoot. It's raining. There's glass and debris and shrapnel from this tornado everywhere. And there are shoes, almost as if they were lined up. And my son's really tall. He's 6 foot. My sister-in-law is pretty petite. She's 5'2". And there's a pair of shoes for all four of them to be put on that fit. And so they kind of huddled together. They were not where we were. We were under all the debris down at the bottom of the basement. And Tim has to try to free his dad. And so he goes looking for anything to try to free his dad. And our son calls out and says, the gas is on. The gas is broken. And
There was a gas leak.
And Tim says to our son, look for something that could shut off the gas leak. Our son is looking around, and there's a toolbox that has been dumped. And maybe you can explain that better.
So I'll back up a little bit. My job at this point was to survey the damage and look for tools to get my dad out. Look for anything that would help us to free him so we could get out of the storm. We didn't know if there was more tornadoes coming. So I had shoes on, actually. I had slippers on. I was one of the only ones that had slippers on or anything on, shoe-wise. So I had climbed up and out of the basement and was walking around in all of this debris. And in the midst of walking around and looking, I noticed that there was a gas leak. I told my son to find a wrench. I was headed to the cars because I knew that there was a jack in the car, and perhaps we could use the jack to move the washing machine off my dad. I didn't know, but I was just looking. So after I had gone through the car and gotten the jack, there was a walking stick that was in the car that was my dad's. I brought that. I'm walking back down the hill through all that debris, and I see a 2-pound sledgehammer and thought that might be useful for something. So I grabbed that and threw it in the basement where my brother was working. Next to that hammer was a 16-foot extension ladder just laying there. It's unbelievable, right? So I go back down, or my son hails me, and he's like, hey, Pop, I found this wrench. I'm like, see if it works, bro. And he put it on the gas meter and turned the valve off like it was nothing. I mean, it was a perfect fit, like it was made for that valve. It was just unreal.
The extension ladder that Tim found was the only way his dad could have climbed out of the basement because he was injured. He was able to use that to get to safety.
Tell them about the flashlights.
Yeah. So we've just been in a tornado. We've been pinned under rubble. Tim doesn't know how. Army crawled through. I described that. He stands up to try to help us. he has a flashlight in his hand. His brother has a flashlight in his hand. Our sons both have flashlights. Our nephews. We have light, we can see. It's how do we all have a working flashlight? The Lord.
So one of the things, as you guys told me the story back in December, one of the things that I was thinking, like the biggest question in my mind is, when we read stories in the Bible, like the story of Joseph, like, oh, it was a really bad situation. But the odd thing is, really bad situations make our faith stronger, not weaker. And one of the questions that I've always wanted to ask, and I never asked, is what do you think this incident has done to help your faith be stronger than it's ever been?
Well, I can think of two things that I've learned through this process. The one thing is that no matter how dark and difficult the situation, that God will provide for your needs over and over and over. He will provide just exactly what you need in exactly that moment. The other thing I've learned is that every day is a gift. Life is a gift. I wake up every day knowing God has a purpose and a plan for me. And what is that supposed to be for me that day? Because life is a gift.
Tim, what would you say? Would you answer that?
For me, it's a couple of things too. But for me, it's God's providence. It's His. He said that He would keep us and take care of us, and He did. Those things that were laid out for us to use didn't have to be there. They could have been carried off in the storm or thrown miles away. So He protected us, and it was His providence. And the other thing that I learned is not to judge a book by its cover. You know, it's hard to see people and not wonder in your mind, you know, are you better than them, or are you worse off than them, or why do they look like this, or they look like that, or whatever. When we were walking through Meyer the day after the storm, we had nothing. I mean, we were wearing some man's clothes who was 3 times the size of me, and all of us, all 9 of us, were wearing his clothes, and we looked like vagabonds going through the store because we don't have a thing. We don't have our own shoes. We don't have our own clothes. We don't have our own cars. We have nothing. I had a wallet and you had a purse. We ended up finding those things. So it's just, don't judge someone when you see them, because you have no idea what they've gone through.
Hey, so let's say thanks to Tim and Kelly for sharing. Yep. But here's the other thing that I just want you to, it'd be great if this was because it's easy to come on Sunday and go, yeah, that was a really good story, but then it kind of vanishes. My thought for this was you know what would it be like if when something really horrible happened, the mindset wasn't, why in the world? The mindset was, how can you use this situation to make my faith stronger? Because this isn't good, and I don't want to go through this. But God, how can you use this situation not to make me decrease, but to increase my faith in ways that really would help me become mature and complete? That's something that would take us from where we were to where we are, but it would also help us to be more confident that God really is with us, even when life doesn't make sense. Let me pray for us. So God, first off, thank you for Tim and Kelly sharing their story, because most of us, especially me, Lord, I couldn't imagine. I couldn't imagine a house coming down on me. I couldn't imagine the storm. I couldn't imagine my dad being trapped. I couldn't imagine feeling helpless. I couldn't imagine laying on the floor beside Vanessa. hearing her voice, knowing what are we going to do? But God, the one thing that I'm super, super thankful for is I'm super thankful for the ways that you interceded on Tim and Kelly's behalf, but I'm also thankful for the ways you intercede on our behalf. Because there's things that you do in the background of our life that we often don't know, that we often don't understand, and we often miss because we're just not looking. So I do want to pray that our mindset to this situation really would begin to be a little bit different. God, we want you to know how much we love you. We thank you for Jesus. We thank you for the ways that you blessed us. It's in his name we pray. Amen.